Hello, everyone. Welcome back again for what is essentially our last full week here. Um, I think our last day is technically next Monday, the 21st. Um, so I will probably have at least one video for you to watch on the 21st. Um, and obviously, that's when our essays due. That's when I need, excuse me, any late work. Anything you're still missing, especially the essays, of course. But any homeworks or discussions or anything like that, you can do all of that until the 21st. That's kind of last day I need all that stuff. So I want to continue talking about M Butterfly here. I'm going to try to get through the rest of the play. Last time we talked about Act One. So yeah, let's get into it. Oh, I wanted to say also, your rough drafts are due, I believe, Wednesday of this week, 16th. I'm going to try to have comments posted for you by the end of the day on Thursday, probably not till pretty late on Thursday. So I would say by Friday morning, they should all be up there, definitely. But I'll probably be doing it, probably Thursday evening, Thursday night. So you might see that pop up. I think you get an email when I grade these things, right? So you should be able to see that. So yeah, that's the draft, and I'll have feedback for you as soon as you hand them in. Okay, so Act One. Let's kind of recap where we left off, right? So in terms of stereotypes, right? Because that's kind of the topic that I suggested the most. And I think that gives us like a good thread to kind of understand a lot of what's going on in the play to look at what it's trying to show us about stereotypes. So in Act One, I think we saw a lot about where stereotypes come from, right? We looked at the scene with the magazines, and I talked about the role that Mark plays in kind of Gallimard's development, and how, and also Madame Butterfly, right? Maybe the biggest factor in terms of him believing all these stereotypes so much, right? So I think that was kind of showing us a message, right? I think there's a message there about where stereotypes come from and how people can fall into believing them and stuff, right? Uh, and maybe so it showed us, I think, where stereotypes come from. Maybe it also showed us um, something about like, or at least a little bit about like the consequences or like how they could be negative or because Gallimard never fits into the stereotypes, right? And I think that's kind of negative for him or makes him have low self-esteem or be insecure or whatever. So we see that. But then at the end of Act One, um, we kind of see. I talked about how at the beginning of Act One, or like as the play starts, Gallimard and Song, neither of them seem to fit into these stereotypes, right? But then by the end of Act One, we talked about how they kind of do start to seem to fit into them, right? Where Song, there's that quote, my tiny heart beats too slowly. Song talks about how she's been trying to seem tough, but underneath it all, she's just meek and passive and all the stereotypical things about women, right? Which are of course bullshit, right? Like we can say. So at the end of Act One, if the play ended there, we could kind of say that it's almost trying to show us like, oh, you should fit into these stereotypes, right? Because then like it'll be better, or that there are some truth to them, right? Because Song like pretended not to fit into them, but really does, and like Gallimard didn't think he fit into them, but now he's able to. So maybe stereotypes are fine, That might be what we think if the play ended there. The play doesn't end there, right? And it, I would say significantly undoes that possible message. That it definitely does not end up sending that message. With the biggest reason being that, of course, as we find out in Act Two, kind of the big, twist, the reveal that Song is in fact a man dressing up as a woman, pretending to be a woman, in order to get military secrets from Gallimard. So I think that has to change how we view Song's actions at the end of Act One, right? I marked that line when Song says, my tiny heart beats too quickly and gives me away. I said last time that I thought that line sounded like false to me, that it seemed weird that Song would say this, right? It seemed kind of fake almost. And yeah, it was fake, right? Song is acting. Song. We knew Song was an actor from the beginning, and it seems like a lot of the stuff with Gallimard. Although we'll talk about this at the very end, but I can already tell this is gonna be a long video. Buckle in. Um, we'll talk about it at the end, but like maybe there's a possibility that that song has some feelings for Gallimard at some point. But definitely at this point, it's all about basically getting these military secrets, and Song basically has to, right? Because Song is like, the government like sends Song out to like work on a farm at one point. And it seems like basically Song is trying to save their own ass, to like do favors for the government so that the government will not like mess with them or whatever. And that's where Comrade Chin comes in, right? Who is Song's like handler or something with the government. Who Song's passing all this information along to. Okay, but I want to pause for a second and I want to go to the very beginning of the play. You might not have noticed this, but if you're using the PDF file that I posted on Moodle, which of course you can find under last week, it says M Butterfly, and it has I put the whole thing into one PDF. So even though it says read Acts 2 and 3, that is the whole thing there. And email me if you're having any trouble like downloading that or whatever. Or you can also just Google M Butterfly PDF, and I think there's a version that comes up. But anyway, at the very beginning, the first like couple of pages, because I gave you like the cover and the copyright information. And another thing that I had in there, this is page number 4 by the numbers in the book. And it says this, it says playwright's notes. So these are notes put in there by our author, by David Henry Hwang. And here's what it says. This is from, it quotes here from, it says, a New York Times article on May 11th, 1968. And so this was like a real story that happened, right? This was actual news reporting. And it says, a former French diplomat and a Chinese opera singer have been sentenced to 6 years in jail for spying for China after a 2-day trial that traced a story of clandestine love and mistaken sexual identity. Mr. Boriscott was accused of passing information to China after he fell in love with Mr. Xi, whom he believed for 20 years to be a woman. So that's kind of the kernel where this play starts, is apparently from an actual news story. Apparently something like this actually happened, at least where it was a French diplomat falling in love with a Chinese opera singer who it says the French diplomat thought was a woman but was actually a man, right? So that's a real story that the author puts at the front of the play before the play actually starts, right? It's a note at the beginning. So I think that this shows us something, and that could help us understand what's going on with the play in terms of why it talks so much about Madame Butterfly, this old opera, and like what it's trying to do with stereotypes and all these kinds of things. Because basically, I think like the reason, or at least the starting point for this play, I think was the author reading this actual news story about this happening and just kind of wondering like how could that happen? I think David Henry Hwang reads this actual news story about a French diplomat, getting convicted for espionage, and that with all the details. And I think he was just asking himself, like, well, how did this happen? And I think M Butterfly, in at least in part, is an attempt to explain how that could happen, how it could be possible that a French diplomat would pass along information because they were in a relationship with a Chinese opera singer who they thought was a woman but was actually a man, right? So I think that's a lot of what the play is trying to show us like how that could be possible. And I think that's why like it's because of Madame Butterfly, right? So kind of the question here, I think the central question maybe for a lot of the play is how does Gallimard not realize that Song is a man, right? I think that's kind of a fundamental question we have to try to grapple with. How does Gallimard not realize that Song was actually a man the whole time? And we get some answers, right? Like especially in I think at the beginning of Act 3, when Song is in the courtroom, Song kind of explains like the logistics, right? Like we could address this question on a logistical level. How did he not realize? And they tell us things that the lights were off and whatever. Song never fully undresses, and then Song always talks about being modest and things, and then they whatever like have sex in certain ways where like you wouldn't necessarily notice, or at least it'd be possible, I guess, to not notice. Um, but I think this question still remains, right? Of like how could he have not known? And kind of another thing, maybe I'll skip ahead a little bit to where Song is talking about this. Because one of the amazing things Song says is like uh, on page 61 here, talking about like having Gallimard believe this stuff. Song says, "And chew on this. It wasn't all that hard." Um, So a song says like it wasn't even that hard to make him think this. And so I think obviously there's like the logistical answers, um, but then there's also like I think it shows us something about like the stereotypes and all of that, right? And how like how committed and just how influenced Gallimard was by these stereotypes and by like the vision of Madame Butterfly, you know, like basically he had to see himself that way. It's almost like so going back to like Song like using the stereotypes, right? Because I think that's another thing is the way that Song kind of intentionally uses the stereotypes that Song knows Gallimard wants, you know. Um, and I think that's kind of what's going on in that line I was talking about. My fragile heart beats too quickly and all that. So it's like basically like how did Gallimard not realize? I think a big part of the answer to that question has to be because he's so committed to these stereotypes. Because basically, if Song acts passive or meek or dependent or whatever, all these stereotypes, if Song fits these stereotypes, then Song must be a woman for Gallimard, right? And you know right and being Asian because these are also the stereotypes, the like racial stereotypes. You know, they're also all the same ones about gender. Um, so basically, Gallimard like is so caught in this web of stereotypes that if something fits the stereotype, he just believes that's what it is. You know, like Song acts this way, so how could they be anything other than a woman? So I think that's maybe at least a way to start answering that question. But I just wanted to address that first. All right. Now I kind of want to go through a little bit, look at some specific quotes. Try not to make this video too long. Okay, so we start with Act 2. The first thing that I want to look in Act 2 is on page 37. So this is scene 3 in Act 2. Obviously, before that, we see Song and Gallimard like at the like apartment that Gallimard bought for them in China or whatever. So he's now has the apartment with Song, but he's also still living with his wife. So he's like sneaking off to see Song. So that's kind of the situation, right? It's 1961. So scene 3. This is a scene between Gallimard and Toulon, who is his boss, right? Who in the French government is his boss. So basically, what you see in this scene is Toulon like asking Gallimard for his advice and opinions about like war and stuff. They're talking about the Americans going into Vietnam, right? And basically, Toulon is asking Gallimard like, yeah, should the Americans try to invade Vietnam? Like, how do you think it'll go for them? How would like the local people respond? So like it's such a ridiculous thing because obviously they're asking Gallimard about Vietnam when Gallimard hasn't been to Vietnam, right? But they're like, basically because he has a Chinese mistress in this case, they're like, oh, well, you know about the Chinese people. They'll be fine with America invading the country, right? It's insane, right? But I think what this shows us, connecting back to stereotypes in terms of the message and things, is that basically in this scene, Gallimard like uses these bullshit stereotypes to justify like, military action. So on page 37, um, yeah, Toulon's asking him, yeah, Toulon says, so what do we tell the Americans about Vietnam? Gallimard, tell them there's a natural affinity between the West and the Orient. Gallimard goes on, they want the good things we can give them. If the Americans demonstrate the will to win, the Vietnamese will welcome them into a mutually beneficial union. He goes on, Orientals will always submit to a greater force. So just like the most like blatant racist stuff you could do, right? Saying basically is it's all the stereotypes that he associates with like with women also, and he also associates with them with like Asian people in general and like the East or whatever. Um, so he's saying like if the Americans are dominant, well, you know, Asian people are just submissive, so they'll submit. So it's this bullshit stereotypes, right? But he's I think like what's going on. I think the play is trying to draw a direct line between this kind of like stereotypical thinking and like justifying wars. You know how these like racism and sexism and stuff have been used to justify like colonialism and empire, you know? And it kind of reminds me almost of like certain narratives or justifications about like the war in Iraq, right? Like I don't know if you guys remember this, or I don't know if I'm too much older than you guys, but like one of the things with the war in Iraq was that they were like, oh well, we'll go there and we'll like teach them how to do democracy, you know, like yeah, we'll invade Iraq and we'll blow it up or whatever, but we'll civilize them. It ultimately, you know, they just need to be shown how to have like a good government and stuff, and then everything will be great for them. Actually, we're helping them, right? And people said that about the war in Iraq. So I think you can see how these kind of like racist and stereotype driven ideas and like narratives, how they can be used to like justify something so terrible, you know. They like you might think, oh, stereotypes, like what's the big deal, right? Like who cares, they're not true, they are true, whatever, who cares. It's like, well, there's like very specific historical ways that they've been used again to justify things like America invading Vietnam, America invading Iraq, many other wars, right? And not just America, also other European countries and stuff. But basically, like every empire needs like a belief system and ideology to justify the things that it's doing, you know, because nobody just thinks they're the bad guy. Like nobody walks around like, yeah, we're evil. I just do evil all the time. Nobody thinks that. So there's always some kind of ideological explanation, right? So I think something that we get from this scene three in Act Two is the ways that these stereotypes are like play a role in the perpetuation of empire and colonialism and stuff. So I just wanted to mark that because I think that's like super interesting. And again, if we're thinking in terms of messages and what is it showing us about stereotypes, I think here's one specific thing that you could definitely get into if you were going to write about that. All right, page 39, I want to go to next. This is, so scene four, act two, scene four. This is where we really get the reveal of what Song is doing, right? This is Song talking to Comrade Chin, who again is like with the government. And the song is telling Comrade Chin, you know, the Americans will increase troops in Vietnam from 170,000 with 120,000 militia and 11,000 advisors. And then Comrade Chin is like writing all the stuff down. So here we see Song passing the information along, and I think this is the moment where it really crystallized like what exactly is going on here. A Song pretending to be a man and passing the information along to Comrade Chin. Okay, here's another thing that kind of takes us off into kind of a different topic, but I think shows us something else about stereotypes. So then I think like a few years go by or whatever. Yeah, now it's 1963, and Gallimard basically starts an affair with this woman named Renee. And it's a weird thing because his name is also Renee, right? His name is Renee with one E. And he has an affair with this woman who's Renee with two E's. And this scene might seem weird when you're reading it, you know, it's like, why tell us about like him, whatever, just having an affair with another woman. And I think there is a reason for this. And it starts from, there's one comment that Gallimard makes that kind of leads me to think this way. He says at one point, so after he's talking about, yes, so he's talking to the audience, like right after a lot of the dialogue with Renee. And he says this was simply not acceptable. And then he talks about, you know, how he eventually cut off the affair with Renee, right? But that line of like, this is not acceptable. Like, what is it about Renee that Gallimard finds unacceptable? And I think it fits in. I think it goes back to what I've been talking about this whole time, because I think it's because Renee does not fit into the stereotypes, right? Clearly, he describes her as being very beautiful and stuff, right? But what's their conversations about? Okay. So Gallimard says here on page 43. He says, but is it possible for a woman to be too uninhibited, too willing, so as to seem almost too masculine? So basically, because Renee is like outspoken and like aggressive, like she starts talking to him about like his dick and stuff, you know, and then she goes on kind of this whole thing about how like all the problems in the world are because people wear clothes and like it's people arguing about like whose dick is bigger or whatever. She gives kind of this this theory. And Gallimard is like appalled, right? That a woman would be speaking so like whatever crassly or so directly and stuff like this, or be talking about such a vulgar subject or something like that, you know. So he is appalled by this, and this is why he says, He says, could she's too uninhibited, she's too masculine. Like, because again, those stereotypical things, right? Being outspoken, being aggressive, not being like meek and all those things. Like compare how she's acting in this scene versus how Song acts at the end of Act One, right? And we can see why he yeah, basically Renee is not fitting into these stereotypes, even though she like physically or whatever whatever Galmar said that she looks like the women from the magazines or whatever, but like the way that she's talking and the things she's doing doesn't fit into the stereotypes, so Gallimar can't deal with it. He's like, this is ridiculous. I can't keep doing this. This is absurd. Um, so yeah, it forces him to view her as masculine, just because she's like outspoken and like direct. So I think that shows us something else about how. So basically, his problem with this woman, I think, is that she doesn't fit into the stereotype, so that doesn't work for him. So he stops seeing her. Okay, moving on. I'm gonna go to page 47. Oh, there was just a quote here. So there's a scene here where Gallimar comes very close to kind of blowing the whole thing, right? Because he like gets into some kind of like argument with Song, and he asks Song to like strip or whatever, to like be fully naked, to let Gallimar see, and which would obviously blow the whole thing, because then Gallimar would have to realize that this has been a man the whole time. Um, but Song doesn't do it. So here's what Song says. Song says, "No, Renee, be yourself, a cad, and know that my love is enough. That I submit to the worst you can give me." So Song kind of goes all in on the stereotypes when this is happening, right? Calling him a cad. That's the kind of strange word. It means like womanizer or something like that. That goes back to how Gallimar talks about Pinkerton and Madame Butterfly, right? So Song, I think, like in this moment where Song is worried about being revealed, Song like goes even further into the stereotypes. You're a cad, you're a womanizing foreign devil, and I will submit, right? Because Song is like being Butterfly. And then there's just one line here that I wanted to mark. Gallimar right after this. So then he doesn't do it, right? So then he doesn't make her strip, and he apologizes. And then he ends up by saying, "I want to marry you." And Song says, "I'm pregnant," and then he says, "I want to marry you." So there's a line here on page 47. Now Gallimard's talking to the audience. He says, "Did I not undress her because I knew somewhere deep down what I would find? Perhaps happiness is so rare that our mind can turn somersaults to protect it." So I don't know. I think it's kind of an open question. Like I've talked with students before about like, does Gallimard know on some level, but just like represses it, or he just doesn't want to face it, or like it's just easier to not confront it. I don't know. It's hard to say. But I thought that line was interesting. Happiness is so rare our mind can turn somersaults to protect it. Because I think the stereotypes and stuff is kind of like the somersaults and him being so into the stereotypes. Um, okay, here's an interesting line. This is page 49. So this is scene 7. This is Song talking to Comrade Chin, saying, like, I need a baby, because that's the next step of the plan now, right? Is that Song is going to pretend to be pregnant, so Song's going to have to get a baby at some point. So there's a line here where Song says, ask Comrade Chin, do you know why in the Chinese opera women's roles are played by men? And Comrade Chin says, I don't know, or whatever. Song says, because only a man knows how a woman is supposed to act. And that seems like a weird sentence, right? Only a man knows how a woman is supposed to act. That seems like kind of fucked up, right? It's like what do you mean? Like, wouldn't a woman know better? But I think what Song is trying to say is that like Song is able to fully inhabit the stereotypes that Gallimard is looking for, because Song is a man, and knows these things, that basically like for like that Gallimard's idea of the perfect woman, right? He repeats that a bunch of times throughout the play, that he has loved the perfect woman, right? Song was the ideal woman. And basically, Song is saying the only way that that's possible is because Song is a man and therefore like knows all these bullshit stereotypes and what they're supposed to be, you know. So I think that's why the line there it's interesting, because only a man knows how a woman is supposed to act, supposed to, right? Not how they actually act, but how to fit into the stereotypes perfectly, right? Because ultimately they're stereotypes that were invented in one way or another by men in a way, even though women definitely also perpetuate these stereotypes and contribute to them. Um, but basically saying that like only a man could fully fit into these stereotypes, you know. So that just shows like what Song is doing this whole time. And I think an interesting aspect of this is the way that Song is essentially like weaponizing these stereotypes against Gallimard. Song is using the stereotypes to get an advantage over Gallimard. So like the same way that in Madame Butterfly, Pinkerton's taking advantage of Butterfly. In M Butterfly, we have Song taking advantage in Gallimard. So it's kind of a reversal. I think something the play is really interested in is kind of reversing these roles, reversing the stereotypes, reversing kind of the binaries that are involved here. So I just thought that was an interesting line. And then on page 53, um, this is so now we're in 1966. A few years have gone by, um, and Toulon, Gallimard's boss, yeah, basically tells him everything you've predicted hasn't happened. So I think this is an important scene because it goes back to the other one where Gallimard is making the predictions and giving advice based on these stereotypes, right? And now we have kind of the companion scene that shows us, yes, and all of these stereotypes are wrong and bullshit. And that obviously we know that Vietnam did not go so well for America. So if he was saying, yeah, going to Vietnam, they'll welcome you with open arms. Like obviously with what we know about American history, that wasn't true. That these people, the Vietnamese like fought incredibly hard, right, and made it a years long war. Um, so yeah, Gallimard totally wrong. We see that, and then I think we get into Act Three mostly. There's like a little bit at the end, and then Gallimard gets fired. Basically, gets sent back to France, right? Um, so then at first, I think they also send Song to France at the end of Act Two. Um, so yeah, Gallimard basically gets fired for being totally wrong because all he ever did was tell them was embrace the stereotypes and stuff, and they're like, well, this was terrible military planning actually. So they send them back to France, and then getting to Act Three, we're now in a courthouse in 1986. So from the 60s to the 80s, Gallimard and Song live in France. I think Gallimard leaves his wife. I don't think Gallimard really has much information to pass along, but I think they find something. Yeah, and then eventually they get caught in the 80s, right? So then we have the scene where Song is talking to the judge in a courtroom here, and this is where this is the one I was looking at before, where Song talks about how it wasn't that hard to convince Gallimard, and I think that's why. It's because Song like knew to fit in these stereotypes. Okay, there's a line on 62 that I want to look at here. Um, okay, so here's Song talking to a judge on page 62. Song says, the West thinks of itself as masculine, big guns, big industry, big money. So the East is feminine, weak, delicate, poor, but good at art and full of inscrutable wisdom, the feminine mystique. The West believes the East deep down wants to be dominated because a woman can't think for herself. So I think this is a really important line because it shows how not only that like these it's not just like believing these stereotypes or that just that they're out there, but how they're linked to each other. I think this really shows because it says like the West is masculine, the East is feminine, that these are the stereotypes. So it's like not only are there these stereotypes about race and gender, but they're also linked to each other. Where the stereotypes about women are also the stereotypes about like the East or Asia or whatever. And the stereotypes about men are also the stereotypes about the West, you know? So I think that's a really interesting line that shows just like how like like complicated and how like thick like the web of connections and like the ideology basically is. And yeah, I think this is all trying to explain how Gallimard could possibly fall into this situation. Um, yeah, and then it talks a little more in this just about how Song was like totally taking advantage of Gallimard. Song uh, says like you're my little one, and then Gallimard's like I'm not your little one. You're supposed to be my little one. So there's a whole thing there, and we see like how Song like used these stereotypes against Gallimard, and then oh, here's a good line on page 66. Gallimard says, "I'm a man who loved a woman created by a man." And I think, yeah, that goes back to the thing of just how Song is intentionally using the stereotypes to get back at Gallimard. And I don't know how we view that. Like, I don't know if we blame Song for that or if we look at that as like, deceitful and lying, because it is being deceitful. Um, but if it's, to kind of try to overturn these power relations, if it's kind of like an anti-imperial deceit, I don't know exactly how we would view that. Yeah, Gallimard says, all I loved was a lie. Um, and then we get a scene where, yeah, I think it was a little before this, where Song totally like actually strips in front of Gallimard, right? First we have Song, I think in between Acts 2 and 3, Song like changes costume to be wearing a tuxedo and to totally look like a man now, and takes up all the makeup and stuff that they were wearing before. And then Song, yeah, forces Gallimard to watch him actually get completely naked, and Gallimard, has to actually like confront what he's been trying to not deal with this whole time. And then we get some quotes like this on page 67. Gallimard says, "I finally learned to tell fantasy from reality, and knowing the difference, I choose fantasy." So yeah, Gallimard is forced to realize that it's been a man this whole time, that he hasn't been living Madame Butterfly, right? So basically, I think there's two ways Gallimard could go here. He could come back to reality and realize everything's bullshit, right? Because his fatal flaw is to not be able to realize that all these stereotypes have always been bullshit and that they're nonsense, and that yeah, they just kind of make everyone feel bad, and that they're there to kind of reinforce power relations that have like already been existing in society, Um, so at this moment, you would think he has to realize this now. He must see it's all bullshit because he's been forced to confront the fact that it's been a man this whole time, even though they fit into the stereotypes. But instead, he chooses fantasy. So I think this is an interesting moment because and if you look at Song's dialogue right after this, because then Song says, "I'm your fantasy," um, and then Song says I hoped more for you. Like I thought you'd become something more, something better. I think he's something more like a woman. Um, so I don't know. And then Gallimard like throws Song off the stage, right? But it seems like Song doesn't want to go. So I don't know. I'm not totally sure here if Song was hoping that by exposing himself to Gallimard, that Gallimard would realize that he's been in a relationship with a man this whole time, and that's okay. Like I think Song might have been hoping that Gallimard would just kind of accept being in a homosexual relationship and just be like, oh, okay, well that's just what I do now, or I like that the whole time, so I guess that's what I like. Um, but yeah, I think that would be choosing reality, right? Would be realizing all the stereotypes are bullshit, and if you want to love a man, love a man. That would be reality. But instead, he chooses fantasy, which is why he then because he chooses fantasy, Gallimard then has to become Butterfly. And that's, I think, why the play ends then with Gallimard putting on a kimono and a wig and committing suicide the same way that Butterfly does in Madame Butterfly. Because I think that moment's key where he says, "I choose fantasy," because I think that is him staying committed to the stereotypes, because in the stereotypes, if it turned out that Song had actually been Pinkerton, right? Because Song was the one who was lying and being deceitful and taking advantage and all that. So if Song was Pinkerton in that way, then Gallimard would have to be Butterfly because he refuses. He will not see through the structure of all this. Like he will not let it go. Instead of realizing that his life is not Madame Butterfly and that no one's life was ever Madame Butterfly because it's fucking bullshit, instead of realizing that, he doubles down once again and says, "Well, Song was Pinkerton this whole time, huh? I guess I'm Butterfly then." And then Galmer goes on because and he says right where we see Song being associated with Pinkerton, like on page 68. Gallimard says, "My mistakes were simple and absolute. The man I loved was a cad, a bounder. He deserved nothing but a kick in behind. Instead, I gave him all my love." And that's exactly how he talks about Pinkerton and Butterfly at the beginning of the play. A cad, a bounder. Those are the words that kind of mean like womanizer that they associate with Pinkerton. So now Gallimard is saying the man I loved was a cad and a bounder about Song, right? So Song becomes Pinkerton. Gallimard then has to become Butterfly, only because he can't let go of the stereotypes. So he says here at the end, "Love warped my judgment, blinded my eyes, rearranged the lines on my face until I could look in the mirror and see nothing but a woman." And then I just want to read the last couple of sentences here. It's pretty good. The devastating knowledge underneath it all, the object of her love was nothing more, nothing less than a man. It is 1988, and I have found her at last in a prison on the outskirts of Paris. My name is Renee Gallimard, also known as Madame Butterfly. Um, and then he collapses. Yeah, Gallimard turns upstage and plunges the knife into his body. So then Gallimard commits suicide in the kind of like ritual type way, right, with the seppuku knife and stuff that Butterfly does at the end of Madame Butterfly. So in terms of messages, takeaways here, what are the consequences of believing in stereotypes? Well, it literally, forces Gallimard to end up killing himself, and not like because of sadness or something about not fitting into it, but because he believed in it so much that yeah, if Song was Pinkerton, he had to be Butterfly. Since he was like lied to and whatever, he does the same ending that Madame Butterfly has. So that's a lot. This video has been way too long. I know I'll end it here. But so, okay, stereotypes. What does it show us about stereotypes? If answer that question and you'll have a good thesis. The play shows us that stereotypes and go from there, right? I talked about like it shows us where they come from. It shows us how they can be bad in like a psychological way. It shows us their connection to like military and empire and stuff like that. And then here we see, just like the consequences, how bad it is. Like Gallimard, has to suffer incredibly for believing in these stereotypes. Things end badly for him, right? So I think there's a lot going on with stereotypes here. I think we can get a thesis out of that. I will end this video, and I'll have some more coming for you soon.